tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am the account manager here at OneTouch.io, and I work hand in hand with Tom and Mark Wellens, who is our Chief Customer Success Officer. And
Okay.
we are very excited to be a part of Cyber That Thursday, and looking forward to having a great session.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, Mr. Mark, it's all about you.
Oh, actually, would it be possible to share my screen?
Absolutely. Go for it. You're in control.
Okay. All right. Let's, where is,
Should be on the bottom there. It should say share.
Yep. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay. All right. So just a real quick background on OneTouch.io. We were founded by three individuals, Itzik Asaraf, Zach Rubenstein, and Dmitry Shevchenko, who all three have a ton of experience in networking and security. And a lot of the concepts behind OneTouch, the technology behind OneTouch, was derived and developed from Israeli border control. We are an Israeli-based organization, and our headquarters are in Beersheba, Israel, and our U.S.-based headquarters are in Stamford, Connecticut, where I am currently right now. Again, a lot of the technology that was developed for OneTouch.io was developed from the Israeli border control, and also with some of the largest financial companies in Israel due to auto-detecting credit card usage within companies. In fact, Itzik and Dmitry, Itzik was the chief architect and Dmitry was the chief developer of many of these technologies. So just real quick, going back to the Israeli border control and the technologies based upon that, if you look at some of the challenges that faced or that currently even right now face Israeli border control, they need to make quick and accurate assessments of individuals crossing the border. And they have to do this by analyzing a tremendous amount of data and information on these individuals. And in regards to the financial companies that Itzik and Dmitry were working with as well, they had their own challenges, specifically around PCI and the applications that were developed within Shadow IT. So I would say about 3 years ago, actually about 2.5 years ago, with the coming of with GDPR and CCPA, the founding team members, they set about developing solutions to these challenges that the organizations were facing or were going to face within the next few years, again, in regards to GDPR and a lot of the other regulations around privacy and the data that's being collected within organizations. So with the challenges that the organizations were being faced, they developed a network-based approach, and Mark's going to talk about that as well. So I'm not sure if too many of the attendees on the webinar right now they're currently aware of some of the regulations, specifically the state regulations. Now it seems like CCPA, that's sort of the big state regulation that a lot of people have heard, but it's come to attention that a lot of other states are coming up with their own, or they have their own, but now they're making amendments, making the legislation and the regulations having to have more teeth. So in regards to Massachusetts. If you look at Massachusetts has a consumer data privacy. It's also known as Bill S-120, formerly SD-341. And what is that exactly? So the Massachusetts bill, it allows consumers the right to sue in the event of their personal information or biometric data if it's improperly connected or collected or distributed for any other potential violation of the new law. It also allows new compliance obligations imposes new compliance obligations on businesses. And one specific thing is that the law, it allows consumers, they don't actually have to demonstrate or have any show any suffering, whether monetary or property losses, in order to seek damages for the alleged violation. So this is it just came into effect the beginning of this year. So well, actually, the law was written the beginning of this year. It's going to go into effect, I believe, in 2023, where CCPA, that's going to be going into effect in January of 2020. With CCPA, though, there's a 1-year look back. So if, for example, a consumer asks for information to the organization, they can ask for all the way up until 2019. So again, the urgency of CCPA, there is a little bit of time with the Massachusetts law, but there's quite a bit of urgency in regards to CCPA. We spoke a little bit about the privacy bill. Again, the highlights of the bill. The right to notice at or before the collection of personal information, the right to request a copy of the collected personal information, the right to request deletion of collected personal information, opt out of personal information transfer, the ability to obtain reports of personal information up to twice per year, and businesses, if they can't comply to all these or refuse to comply, they can't charge or increase rates to the customers, exercising their opt-out right. Again, those are the highlights of the Massachusetts bill. And a lot of these particular points are very similar to the CCPA as well. How can OneTouch.io help in regards to compliance and regulation? We provide visibility into organizations' unknown personal data usage. Again, these things that we can help organizations with, Mark will definitely go into full detail and how we do it as well. We discover all cases of personal data processing, analyze traffic on a continuous basis for PII usage, auto data mapping flow. We crawl databases and repositories, identify unique subjects, and DSAR and the right to be forgotten. So these are all the areas that OneTouch.io can help organizations with in terms of compliance and regulation. And again, Mark will be able to expand upon these topics. All right, Mark, thank you. And I'll stop sharing my screen so Mark can start sharing his. Hi, Mark. I think you're on mute.
Yep, I'm now off mute.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, David. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for introducing us to Bill. He's a great guy, obviously. He's going to help us understand sort of the rationale behind OneTouch.io, the solution here. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I apologize for the accent. I shouldn't really, but some people find it quite difficult. But any questions, just drop them in the chat window. We'll get to them. Let me introduce you to our dashboard, which is the first thing you'll see when you log into OneTouch. And it presents you quite a nice picture of the current state of play of the PII currently in the network of this company. Fictitious company, of course, it's a demo. But what we see here is we've got 13 million PII entities in there for subjects. And what we want to do is just understand, how did we get here? It's very nice to know this, but how did we get here? How did OneTouch bring me this information? What's the secret sauce behind all of this? So let's start very simply by saying how, or by telling you how we get into this picture here. OneTouch is generally an appliance-based solution. We put our appliance inside your network, and what we do is we take a span port or a tapping port, Ixia, Gigamon, something like that, so that we can see a copy of the network traffic. That is one of the things that we'd like to do, and it's unique to our solution as regards to privacy. And what we do is we take the copy of that network traffic and we use it to enrich the information that we find from data at rest. Data at rest meaning file shares, meaning databases, meaning NFS, anything which is stored on a server. The very, very first thing we do when connected to a copy of the network traffic is we start to look at how many different network elements there are there. So what we'll do is we'll take those and we'll actually build a network map. And that's the first thing I'd like to show you. So from this data in motion, from the copy of the network traffic, we start to build a network map. And we've done that from seeing all the different IP addresses and from seeing who is pushing data to whom. Where does it begin, where does it go, and where does it end? Sometimes you'll see on this legend, I don't know if you can see clearly, we've shared, processed, and stored. And if I just make it a little bit bigger, you can see where we say data is stored, we can say where data is shared here, and we can actually follow how the data goes through the network. It's not, I was going to say it's not very impressive. It is quite impressive here, but it's actually much more useful for compliance and regulation when we show the data flow per business use. And I'll come to that in the not too distant future. We've made our network map. It's very nice. It's very easy to see because there's a few network elements here. As you can imagine, when there's 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, a million, this becomes relatively difficult to see. But one of the reasons we do that is to give a CMDB-like state, as it were, of all your network elements. What we then do is we further refine that and we produce repositories. The repositories are what we have discovered within your network, which we suspect is holding personal data, or PII. So we took the list of network elements and said, we have identified from that list these different repositories, that's our terminology, that are holding PII, and we're building that list for you. Why are we doing that? It's the first challenge that we face when we come to any customer and we deploy our product. They say, okay, so my data is stored here, and it's stored here, it's stored here. We say, thank you very much for that list. We can add that manually, as you can see with this bottom one here, this bottom Windows server here. But actually, what we'd like to do is build that list for you because it's ever changing. Networks are dynamic. With the advent of DevOps, for example, people spin up and spin down servers all the time. So you may have copies of your main database being brought online for testing purposes, primarily for testing purposes, and you're not even aware of that. OneTouch will find it when that comes online, and it will let you know, it'll alert you, there is a new database, you need to start looking at that for potential PII. So this list here that we create, it doesn't require any human intervention. You can, if you wish, add to it. We build it, we keep it up to date, so that whenever you are asked questions about compliance, you can truthfully say, yes, I know where all my PII is stored because I discover all my PII container repositories. So that's one of the other reasons that we're holding a copy of the network traffic, that we're actually listening to it. I didn't mean holding. We're listening to the network traffic to create this rich repository of where it's at. Okay, very interesting, so you say, or maybe not. But what is the goal? What's the end result here, or the end goal that we have? What I want to do is to be able to find out what do I hold about an individual, because at the end of the day, that individual may call me up, whether he's a customer or not, and he may ask for what do I hold on that individual. Okay, in Bill S120, there has to be two ways for a consumer to get that information from you. So one way is through OneTouch. They can go to a web form and they can put in some unique information about themselves, and somehow they'll get this data back. Obviously, you want to authenticate who is that user. You need some kind of proof that that user is who they claim that they are. So there's some kind of authentication going on there. What we've done is we've said, okay, you called us up. Itzik, our CTO, called up and said, hey, what do you guys know about me? Who'd you share it with? So we produce that information pretty much straight away. It's much more relevant when it's an email address or a passport number or something like that that's used to identify the individual. Normally, you wouldn't have just one name. It's an unusual name, but you'd usually have more than one of a name in the system. But we have one here, and we identify that we know about all the different personal identifiable entities here: birthday, where they work, what is their email, and so on. All that information. We happen to know some sensitive information too, or deemed sensitive as well. Who do we share that information with? According to what we know, we're sharing with two companies, ProsperWorks and Microsoft. And it looks like the company that I'm working for right now, not OneTouch, but whomever this is representing, we don't actually have an agreement with ProsperWorks to share, or it's not complete, but we do have with Microsoft. So that should be a red flag anyways. The end user obviously doesn't see this, but this is what we tell the end user who's requested. The user may then say, okay, I wish to invoke my right to be forgotten. That is their right, of course. And that means we have to then say, where is this information stored? So what we can actually do is say, all of the information about ITSIC can be found in these different files, which are in these different shares. We can also say which databases do we hold information about ITSIC, and here we have a list of the databases. Currently, OneTouch does not actively go out and remove that information. That's not what we do. But as soon as that information is removed, we will then crawl the databases again, and we will see, we'll see that that information was removed, and we'll be able to actually do the complete DSAR all the way through to right to be forgotten. If I show you very quickly our DSAR workflow, very simple DSAR workflow, it assumes that there was a way for the user, the consumer, to enter information and let me know that they were asking. In the case of John Smith here, what we have is some request and then some way of identifying that John Smith really is John Smith. And what we then do is produce this DSAR report, which I'd like to show you. Opens a new tab, PDF file, and the DSAR report is generated automatically. Obviously, you can customize it to how you'd like it to look. And it says to Joan, this is what we hold about you, right? This is the information. This is who you are. This is why we have such information about you. These are where it came from. This is who we share with, right? And this is where, or this is the copies that we have in the system. So we send that report to her. And we also actually send some information about her as well, relevant documents which are related to her as well. So we have very nice little report built in there that comes straight out, and you can automate this. One of the key drivers for us here was DDoS by DSAR. It's one of our customers said that was their biggest concern. They were very worried about DDoS by DSAR, and they wanted a way to automate the process of handling DSARs. So I just have a question here, which I can take over. Is the DSAR report PDF automated? The answer is yes. Yes, it is. What you have to do, of course, is customize. You probably don't have a company logo like this, but you have to customize it slightly in the back end. And then what you will do is plug in OneTouch into the workflow, however you want to do it, maybe through a web form with some form of authentication, and take the data directly from us, either using Open API or some other mechanism, or you can actually just put the information into OneTouch, into our DSAR workflow, and we'll generate that report for you automatically. Either way works. Okay, so we looked a little bit about DSAR, and thank you for the question. That's always good when they come in. It means that you're actually understanding and more so listening as well, which is fabulous. We've done the DSAR, and what I'd like to look at right now is just one of the things I haven't showed you yet, which is the use of the data here. So we're sharing different data with different third parties. You can see we have some listed here. What I've done here is I've said I have different uses for my data. We have customers who are our customers, we have employees, we have a VIP program, but we're going to just look at the customers. And what this is showing me is how is my customer data, the data that I've stored about my customers, how is it used in terms of how is it flowing, who am I sharing it with, and how many copies have I got? So from a pure risk perspective, on the top left here, there's a graph that shows for 100%, right, of my PII for customer, which is all of my customer information, there are 211 copies, which could mean someone exported a database to CSV and copied that CSV 200 times. Could be multiple instances of that database, but more likely it's because it's demo, we put a high number just to kind of scare people. The truth is you have many copies out there which probably are not required, but what is more likely is you've got partial copies. So this says that there is 40% of the PII can be found 2,578 times within the network location. And really what we want to see is a very steep downward curve from here to show us that our risk is very small. So we want to see a very, very steep curve here, maybe coming down here to very few copies. It's an indicator of your risk. That's all we have there. I mentioned earlier about us looking at the network traffic. This is another reason we looked at the big network map. This network map shows me specifically the flow for personal data for my customers, where it's initiating from, who's processing, who's storing, who's sharing. And we can see that at the end here, it goes out to Google, it goes out to Office.com, it goes out to ProsperWorks. We can see where it goes. We can see internally where it's being stored, and we can see who's processing. And this is a requirement from the compliance regulations to know the flow of the data. Essentially, it's actually there for you to visualize so that you know that your expected use of data, as you see from the flow, is what the actual. Sorry, the actual is what you see in the flow meets your expectation. Because if the data is going places you didn't expect, then of course you have some kind of issue to deal with. So it's as much for you as it is for the regulation. If I take a quick look into our agreement here with Microsoft, sorry, I need to go back to my third-party sharing. Here we go. What I'd like to have a look at here is the actual agreement that we have in place, and it's a very simple workflow within the one-touch solution here. Who is my contact at this third-party Microsoft here? Legally, have we got the relevant pieces in place? And I've said I need to have 3 contracts at least available. They're approved, which is better, and signed. So these are the main ones. Then I have a 5-year offer on the table, which I haven't actually signed on yet. What other contracts may I need? Well, there are other contracts available. You can add to this list as well if it meets your requirement to add different things into here. That was all kind of dull and, in my opinion, not very interesting. But this is actually very interesting. What information am I allowed to share with Office? What can I copy up there? What can I put in there? And it turns out to be a subset of the actual total customer data that I hold. So I can't share birthdays, I can't share email addresses from in here, I can't share user IDs, I can't share passports, but I can share other information. So this is key here, because if any of that information goes out my system, which shouldn't do, I'm in breach of the contract that my customers have agreed to and that I've got with Office here. And so I want to have an alert that comes out of the system and tells me. The final piece here is, what is this relationship about? Why do we have this? And of course, is it approved? If I had a piece of information, a piece of PII that went out the system and it wasn't supposed to, it would appear in this privacy log. The privacy event log tells us a lot of things that are going on. It tells us when new data subjects are found, something of interest in a privacy event. It tells us when something was shared, tells us when processing happened, and many, many more things like this. So for example, like at the beginning, I said if someone spins up a VM which contains a copy of your database or has some PII, there's a privacy event that occurs that says, hey, you have got a new network element which is holding PII, and you don't have credentials to go in and crawl it. So you need to address that, please. So that is another event, and essentially anything covering privacy is going to come up here and tell you you have an action to take or you need to be aware of something. This information can be integrated with a SIM or a syslog or something like that. You can also have certain alerts sent via email or perhaps SMS if you have an SMS gateway and you deem them to be urgent enough like that. So those come out for many different reasons. The one I brought us here for was in case you share inadvertently, or perhaps on purpose, data with a third party that you're not supposed to share. Okay. Let's have a little look at what we call the stored by and the processed by. Again, demo database, but we say we processed a lot of data by 12,000 network elements. And what we see is a list here of personal information, not sensitive in this case, that was actually processed, that's the filter up here, by different servers. I'd like to look at the most interesting one, transactions and databases. And what we can see here is TDS transaction on the wire, which contains some PII. And if I open that up, I can see that certain entities were put into the database over this TDS transaction, and there were certain other transactions on the wire that held PII. This SMB2 is where these other files are actually from. So I have 2 sets of information about transactions. Transaction is something that happens on the network itself. So what we're doing, and this is another reason why we're taking why we're looking at a copy of the network traffic, is to see where the PII is moving, right? Who is sharing it, who is doing things with it. When we see an SQL commit, for example, so we know somebody, excuse me, somebody was storing data in the database, right? That's what we can see within the actual protocol. We take the different TCP packets, we rebuild or reconstruct them into the original larger picture, let's say, and we can look at that protocol there. So when it's a SQL or TDS or something, we can see transactions and drill into those and see what's going on. If we find that it's actually a PDF file, so we can recreate the original PDF that it came from, even if we don't have the source, the data at rest source, we can still recreate that, and we can analyze the PDF in motion and see if it is PII. Again, if it is PII and it's being saved to a CIF share or an SMB share, that's an important event. We want to start checking that CIF share for more PII. Now, at this point, I'm going to try and say something to make sure that it's very clear what we're actually doing as well here. What we're doing is using data in motion to enrich the data at rest. And the first thing we do is build your inventory. And the second thing we do is ask for read-only credentials to crawl that inventory, to interrogate that inventory for PII. So actually what I'm doing is I'm looking at, and let's go back to my inventory for a minute. I'm looking at my repository and I'm seeing where is their PII stored. So I have credentials, I've crawled, and I found what's called data at rest here. In this NetApp kind of thing here, central storage, I found a lot of PII. And it's going to be in a lot of files. And I could actually look at the data at rest, the inventory there, just have a quick, look at that as well, and see here's where a lot of my information is stored in this file here, customers Excel, in this path here. And I can see how much PII is there. So I don't want you to think we're only looking at data in motion. We're certainly looking at the data at rest. We're looking at file shares. We're looking at databases, Oracle, MS SQL. We're looking at NFS. We're looking at whatever you want to call there. And we're saying, I found PII there when we do. Of course, we want to enrich that and understand better the context. So what we'll do is we'll look at the traffic on the network, and we'll actually start looking for correlations, let's say. In addition to the standard NLP, AI, distance learning, regex that people use to identify data at rest. If I think about data in motion again, just for 1 minute, and I see on the wire that user, right, Mark, that's me. I've actually opened the web page, and I want to see the employee directory. So whatever application in the back end is bringing me that data, OneTouch is seeing the transactions going on. And what we see, for example, is that application joins table 1 and table 2, and it joins it by a certain key, just to produce information on the screen for me. What we'll also see in the network is another user, say Daniel, and Daniel's not using the directory application, he's using some other application. Maybe he's using payroll. And payroll application is also joining tables. It's joining table 1 with table 3, not with table 2 as the directory was. So OneTouch now knows there's a relationship between table 1, table 2, and table 3. And it can start to identify PII for unique individuals using that extra information that we're seeing on the wire. Okay. Yes, data at rest, we look at that, we use all the standard techniques, and then we enrich it with the information we see. Let me show you what I mean by the data linkage that I just talked about, linking the different tables. I'm going back to where we saw processed data. And what I want to do is go into the databases that are being talked about here. And inside the database, there are many tables. This is a small database. Usually you have hundreds of tables. And what we can see is some kind of lineage between the tables. What I'll do is I'll just change the view to the virtual relationship view, and you see it a bit more clearly. So what OneTouch has said is based on the, sorry, I made that too small. Based on the traffic that I'm seeing, there is linkage between the different tables. And I'm going to start making richer PII records based on this lineage, which I'm also seeing, which is, it's very, when you're doing PII, you don't want to have 5 copies of Mark Wellens in your network, right? They're probably the same individual, even though it's not a very unusual name. It's not completely unknown. What I want to do is have one record of everything to do with Mark Wellens. There may be another guy called Mark Wellens, but I want to make sure that I only have one record where it really is only one record. Certainly with the employees, what we often see is different databases holding employee information. And when you produce a list, let's say, of that across your inventory, you get multiple copies of the same individual. When we look at our dashboards, we're talking about unique individuals. We're not talking about PII and there's 6 copies of Mark Wellens. We're talking about unique records per individual here. Okay, one of the last things I'd like to just touch on before we can open for more questions if there are, is the nature of sensitivity. You can see that we identify health, criminal, political, and a few others as sensitive. And that means that the system is able to recognize the difference between things like names and passport numbers with union membership, let's say, because union membership may look a bit like a name as well. So we've got a lot of learning processes in there, a lot of AI in there that is actually doing the heavy lifting under the covers. It's one of the reasons why our appliance is a very strong system. It's got 32 CPU cores. It's got a lot of memory, currently 256, but we're going to increase that. And it's got an NVIDIA card in there to assist with a lot of processing. When you think about potential locations for PII, you don't automatically think about video, audio. You do think about images, but all of those types of files can contain PII. And you need to be able to go in and basically analyze video, analyze audio for any PII that may exist in there. And so that's why we need a very strong system. And of course, we're going to have a lot of different techniques to identify the PII within such streams. It's very difficult to justify the compute costs if you put this in the cloud, based on what I just mentioned. So video is you need to take the whole stream, then you have to analyze it after the fact. But it's not something that would be cost effective to analyze in the cloud. Certainly not at this stage. Maybe in the future, costs will come down and it will become more cost effective. Last but not least, I did mention how we have different business use cases. I'll just go into that one more time. What we have is a view of the data based on the customers, based on employees, lead gen program, and VIP. And each of these different uses allows us to track how is that data going within the network, how is it being shared. And if we just a peek at customers again, just to remind ourselves, this was the sort of the key takeaway from looking at the customer data. This is how it flows within the network. This is how it's being used. This is where it's shared. This is where it's processed, and this is where it's stored. And we do this for each type of business use case that we tell the system about. It's actually quite easy to teach the system about that. We point to a table that contains customer information or an Excel file, and it from there it understands what customer data looks like. Okay, thank you for listening to me. I'd like to open up to any questions, any thoughts that you may want to share with us. The floor is all yours.
All right. I'm trying to see if there's any questions here. I don't think we have any. I think the one we had you did answer. If anyone does have any questions after the fact, please, oh, there's one. What challenges do you see with finding the appropriate scan ports?
It is a good question. Operationally, that can be a challenge. In I'm going to say well-behaved networks, we don't have a problem connecting to span ports of Cisco switches. Generally, that's quite straightforward. Where customer has ICSI or Gigamon, that's also relatively straightforward as well. VMware environments offer you the chance to create a promiscuous port, and that works for us too. So we don't, so far we've not had an issue getting traffic data in motion. Customers are quite happy to put that in when they design the architecture. It's not particularly difficult. You put an appliance in, connect to the span port, but it depends which span port you take based on how much traffic you want to share with us. We usually get installed by the backbone so that we can see pretty much all the traffic that's going through there. I mentioned that it's a strong appliance. We have 8 10 gig ports on there, so the amount of traffic we can handle is quite large, and we scale in terms of distribution by having multiple boxes. So it's possible to have more than one box to handle that volume of traffic.
All right, they're piling in now. How does the solution differentiate between two John Smiths?
That's a really good question. there's a lot of techniques we're using inside the system. So there's what do you call it? There's NLP, language, right? Natural language. There's AI. There's distance and all sorts for us to identify PII first of all. Now, if there are two John Smiths, one with passport number one and one with passport number 2, there'll be different places in the network that will have a record for that. So there may be a master table that contains my customers, and John Smith will be in there twice with different keys. Because we're able to look at the table linkage, right? That was one of the things I was showing earlier. We can actually figure out which John Smith has PII of passport 1 and which one has PII of passport 2. So we use our, I'm going to say our analytics, because I don't have a better phrase for it, to ensure that John Smith with passport 1 is uniquely identified and identified correctly, and John Smith with passport 2 is uniquely identified and identified correctly. Often it'll be an email address that allows us to differentiate between different John Smiths, but what we're looking for is a unique PII entity to let us know, oh, that John Smith is different from this other John Smith.
Okay, the last one on here, and then I have a couple more actually. How do you interact with container apps, virtual networks, and SDNs?
So I'm going to look in the middle first, the virtual networks. We do offer a virtual appliance. It does need a lot of power, obviously, as I was mentioning. So we can sit inside VMware. We support VMware appliance. So we can work within any virtual environment of VMware. I would say we don't work within Amazon, because I know that's very different from VMware itself. But we do support Amazon as a repository of data, right? That's somewhere where we can look as well. So any app that we can connect to via an API to interrogate, such as let's take Microsoft OneDrive as a container app, even though it's not your classic container app. As long as we have a way to connect via an API, we can interrogate and find out when there's new data, when data's changed, when PII is moved around. So if there is a way to read into it, we will read into it.
All right. The other questions that I had actually early, and I think you've touched on them, but it might be good to just touch base again. How do you deal with tracking encrypted traffic?
That's the $1 million question, or even the $6 million question that's asked. Yeah, it's a great one. It's always there, and it's very true. In today's networks, most traffic is under HTTPS or some other encrypted form. So that's where the ICSI and the Gigamon come in today. We like to take from there because they do the decryption. We support ICAP servers. So most of the firewalls and load balancers that are generally used today offer an ICAP interface, so we can take traffic from there too. So even in those environments where traffic is encrypted, we can take a copy of the unencrypted traffic. On our roadmap for sometime later this year, and because the box was built with this in mind, we have a decryption module coming along. So we'll be able to actually look at encrypted traffic without assistance, let's say. But let me share one thing with you. When we look at any network, and I'm talking about financial networks, I'm talking about anywhere where you would expect encryption, we find that a lot of the traffic is still unencrypted, and we can still actually see and find PII on the wire. One I was working with the other day, we found 30,000 unique PII elements on the wire, which they were very shocked about, but later on they understood how we'd seen it, because we showed them that there was a HTTP over port 80, which is unencrypted, which they'd kind of forgotten about, whether by accident or by design, and we found the traffic. So despite a lot of encryption going on, there are still unencrypted networks out there, and we have the ways to read traffic now, even when it's been encrypted by utilizing third-party help.
All right, one more that I had, and then there's another one in the window there. Can you export data flow maps to use for reporting?
Can we? I think we're talking about this map on here. I suspect they'd quite like us to be able to export in a nice PNG. There's no, actually not just PNG with IP addresses. There's no export capability, but I think that's a rather nice enhancement request that I shall push down the line, and thank you for that. That is a nice enhancement request.
Okay. And then the last one in the window here, why is it important to understand unknown data? If I wasn't aware about it, if I wasn't aware of it, how is GDPR and CCPA going to know about it?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Of course, GDPR and CCPA aren't going to know anything that you don't tell them about. As a company, you have to do due diligence. You have to make your best efforts to be GDPR or CCPA compliant. And your best effort means that you have to find the PII within your network and report and respond accordingly. Now, what does that mean? Right? That means that before OneTouch came along, I would have to do a manual survey. I'd have to go around and find out where are my servers that people know about. And that's the key here. Where are the servers that we know about? Because if we don't know about them, how can we do anything with them? Until OneTouch came along. Now OneTouch says, hey, let me go discover them for you. So without any additional effort, in fact, with much less effort than going to the trouble of doing surveys, finding people who know where servers are, with much less human resource, you can now discover all the unknown repositories as well, or previously unknown. Because as soon as you discover them, they're no longer unknown. And that's what it means by best effort. When there's a solution available that will let you, again, with less resources even than before, find out where the PII, all of a sudden that becomes under the compliance banner because it says, do your best efforts. If you don't know about OneTouch, then of course we want to broaden your horizons, broaden your mind. But right now, the best effort now includes being able to discover previously unknown network elements that contain PII.